For 7 years, the mansion lived in silence. Not because it was peaceful, but because the Mafia boss's daughter, little Elena, had never heard a single sound in her life. Doctors called her case hopeless. Specialists said her ears were perfectly healthy. Yet she was deaf, completely unresponsive. The boss spent millions. He threatened surgeons, begged priests. Nothing changed, until the night Elena wandered away from her nanny and sat alone at the edge of the marketplace, staring blankly into the distance. A homeless boy, no older than 10, approached her. Dirty clothes, bare feet, holding a rusted tin cup. He shouldn't have noticed anything unusual, but he did. He stepped closer, studying her face, then her ears. "Elena," he whispered. She didn't react. Then, with a calmness no child should have, he gently lifted her hair and reached toward her ear. The guards watching from the alley gasped, but before they could intervene, the boy pinched something inside her ear canal and pulled. Something thin, clear, thread-like, artificial. A translucent filament slid out, almost invisible, but long, too long, far too deep to be natural. The moment it left her ear, Elena jerked. She blinked fast, and for the first time in her life, she turned toward a sound. The sound of the boy's breathing. The homeless child looked up, eyes filled with fear and certainty. "They put this inside her," he said. "She wasn't born deaf. Someone made her deaf." And behind him, in a black car, the Mafia boss had watched the entire thing. His hands shook, because he knew only one kind of person used that type of filament: traitors inside his own home. Stay with me until the end, because what the Mafia boss discovers next about who planted that filament will turn his entire empire upside down. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Vincent Torino ruled the streets of Chicago with an iron fist and a reputation that made grown men cross themselves when they heard his name. But none of that power, none of that fear, none of those connections meant anything when it came to his daughter, Elena. She was 7 years old, with dark curls that caught the light and eyes that sparkled with intelligence, but lived trapped in a world of absolute silence. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you find in libraries or churches, the kind of silence that steals childhood laughter and bedtime stories and the simple joy of hearing your father say he loves you. Vincent had noticed it when Elena was just 8 months old. Other babies startled at loud noises, turned toward voices, giggled at silly sounds. Elena did none of these things. She would sit perfectly still while chaos erupted around her, unmoved by car alarms, crying, or even gunshots in the distance. The first doctor was optimistic. "Some children develop hearing later than others," he'd said. "Give it time." Vincent gave it time. 6 months of watching his daughter exist in a bubble no one else could penetrate. The second doctor ran more tests. Expensive ones. The kind that required Elena to be sedated while machines hummed and clicked around her small head. The results came back normal. Her ears were structurally perfect. Her brain showed no signs of damage, yet she remained completely unresponsive to sound. That's when Vincent stopped being patient and started being dangerous. He flew specialists in from Switzerland. He paid neurologists from Johns Hopkins more money than most people see in a lifetime. He had Elena examined by doctors whose names appeared in medical journals and whose waiting lists stretched for years. Every single one of them said the same thing. Her hearing should be perfect. There was no medical reason for her deafness. No genetic markers, no birth trauma, no infection, no explanation that made sense. But Vincent Torino hadn't built his empire by accepting things that didn't make sense. When someone told him something was impossible, he found a way to make it possible. When someone said no, he found a way to make them say yes. Except this time, all his power meant nothing. He watched his daughter grow from a baby into a toddler, then from a toddler into a little girl, all while living in a world he couldn't enter. She learned to communicate through gestures and expressions. She developed an uncanny ability to read lips and facial expressions. She was brilliant, creative, and determined, but she was also isolated in a way that broke Vincent's heart every single day. Elena would sit by the window for hours, watching birds fly past, completely unaware of their songs. She would play with toys that made sounds, spinning music boxes and pressing buttons on electronic games, never knowing the melodies and beeps they produced. She would mouth words she'd learned by watching others speak, her voice growing stronger even though she couldn't hear herself. Vincent hired the best tutors money could buy, speech therapists who specialized in deaf children, sign language instructors who were patient and kind, teachers who understood how to reach a child living in silence. But late at night, when the mansion grew quiet and Elena was sleeping, Vincent would stand in her doorway and wonder what kind of father he was if he couldn't give his daughter something as basic as the ability to hear. The breaking point came on Elena's 6th birthday. Vincent had planned an elaborate party, the kind of celebration that would make any little girl feel like a princess. A carousel in the backyard, a magician who performed tricks that relied on visual wonder rather than sound, a cake that stood 3 feet tall and sparkled with edible glitter. Elena smiled and clapped and hugged everyone who came to celebrate with her. But Vincent caught moments when she would pause, tilting her head slightly, as if trying to sense something that remained forever out of reach. During the cha-cha cake ceremony, as everyone sang happy birthday, Elena stood perfectly still, watching their mouths move in unison, seeing their joy but unable to participate in the most basic childhood ritual of making a wish and blowing out candles while surrounded by song. That night, Vincent made a decision that would change everything. He called in favors from contacts who operated in the shadows of legitimate medicine, people who dealt in experimental procedures and cutting-edge technology that hadn't been approved by any regulatory board. He reached out to researchers working on cochlear implants that were still in development. He contacted specialists who operated in countries where medical ethics were more flexible. One name kept coming up: Dr. Alexei Petrov, a Russian surgeon who claimed to have developed a revolutionary procedure for treating unexplained deafness. His success rate was supposedly extraordinary, but he only worked with a select few patients who could afford his astronomical fees and who were desperate enough to accept the risks. Vincent arranged a meeting within 48 hours. Dr. Petrov arrived at the mansion on a Tuesday evening, carrying a leather briefcase and an air of confidence that immediately put Vincent on edge. He was a tall, thin man with pale eyes and hands that moved with surgical precision even when he was simply adjusting his glasses. He examined Elena for over an hour, using instruments Vincent had never seen before. He took measurements, ran tests, and asked questions that seemed oddly specific about Elena's daily routines and the layout of the house. Finally, he looked up at Vincent with those cold eyes and smiled. "I can help your daughter," he said, "but my methods are unconventional. The procedure I'm proposing has never been attempted in the United States. It requires complete trust and absolute discretion." Vincent studied the man's face, searching for any sign of deception or false hope. "What exactly are you proposing?" Dr. Petrov opened his briefcase and withdrew a small device that looked like a cross between a hearing aid and something from a science fiction movie. "This is a neural interface that bypasses the traditional auditory pathways. Instead of relying on the ear to process sound, it connects directly to the brain's auditory cortex." The explanation continued for another 20 minutes, filled with medical terminology that Vincent didn't fully understand but pretended to follow. The bottom line was simple. Dr. Petrov claimed he could give Elena her hearing back, but the procedure was experimental, dangerous, and would require Elena to stay under his care for several weeks while the device was calibrated. Vincent asked about risks. Dr. Petrov mentioned possible complications, but dismissed them as unlikely. He spoke about success stories from other patients, though he couldn't provide names or details due to confidentiality agreements. Something about the whole situation felt Wrong. But Vincent was a man who'd built his life on taking calculated risks. And this was his daughter's future they were discussing. He agreed to the procedure. 2 weeks later, Dr. Petrov returned with a full medical team and equipment that transformed one wing of the mansion into a temporary surgical suite. Elena was sedated, and Vincent spent 6 hours pacing the halls, making deals with God and promising anything in exchange for his daughter's hearing. When Elena woke up, she had a small device attached behind her left ear, nearly invisible beneath her dark curls. Dr. Petrov explained that it would take time for her brain to adjust to processing sound through the neural interface. She would need to wear the device constantly, and it would require regular adjustments as she grew. For the first week, nothing happened. Elena seemed unchanged, still living in her world of silence. Then gradually, something shifted. She began responding to her name being called from behind her. She would turn toward sounds she'd never noticed before. She started speaking more confidently, as if she could finally hear her own voice. Vincent was ecstatic. His daughter was finally experiencing the world the way other children did. She was hearing music, laughter, the sound of rain against windows, all for the first time in her life. But as months passed, Vincent began noticing something else. Elena seemed different, more distant. She would stare off into space for long periods, as if listening to something no one else could hear. She began having nightmares that left her screaming words she'd never learned. And sometimes, late at night, Vincent swore he could hear her having conversations with someone who wasn't there. Dr. Petrov had vanished 3 months after the procedure. No forwarding address, no contact information, no trace of the man who'd claimed to give Elena her hearing back. Vincent's security team found his hotel room abandoned, his medical equipment gone, and his supposed credentials completely fabricated. That's when Vincent realized he'd been played. But by who? And why target his daughter? The nighttime conversations Elena was having weren't with imaginary friends. They were with someone real, someone who could communicate through the device Dr. Petrov had implanted in her head, someone who was using his own daughter as a listening device inside his home. Vincent installed surveillance cameras in Elena's room without telling anyone. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Every night at exactly 11:30, Elena would sit up in bed, perfectly still, and begin speaking in a monotone voice that didn't sound like her own. She would recite conversations she'd overheard during the day, business meetings Vincent thought were private, phone calls he'd made from his study, names, dates, locations, and details about operations that could destroy his entire organization. Someone had turned his 7-year-old daughter into an unwitting spy. The device wasn't giving her hearing. It was recording everything she experienced and transmitting it to whoever had orchestrated this elaborate deception. Elena was living with a surveillance system implanted directly into her brain, and she had no idea she was being used as a weapon against her own father. Vincent's first instinct was to have the device surgically removed immediately. But his personal physician, Dr. Martinez, examined Elena and delivered devastating news. The implant had grown into her neural tissue over the months since the procedure. Removing it now could cause permanent brain damage, paralysis, or death. Elena was trapped, and so was Vincent. But the homeless boy at the marketplace had seen something Vincent's expensive specialists had missed. The filament he'd extracted wasn't part of the original implant. It was something else entirely. Something that had been placed in Elena's ear years before Dr. Petrov ever appeared. Vincent realized with growing horror that Elena had been targeted since she was a baby. Someone had been playing a game that lasted 7 years, systematically destroying his daughter's hearing to create the perfect cover for surveillance equipment that no one would ever suspect. The question wasn't just who wanted to spy on Vincent Torino. The question was who had access to his infant daughter, who knew enough about his operations to make this worth the massive investment, and who was patient enough to execute a plan that took nearly a decade to fully implement. Vincent made a list of everyone who'd been close to Elena since birth, Family members, household staff, doctors, nannies, tutors, business associates who'd visited the mansion. The list contained 47 names. Within 72 hours, that list would be much shorter. Vincent's interrogation methods were legendary in Chicago's underworld. Men who thought they were tough would break within hours when Vincent wanted information. But this wasn't about extracting confessions from rival gangsters. This was about finding whoever had turned his daughter into a living surveillance device. He started with Elena's medical records. Every doctor, nurse, and technician who'd ever examined her. Every appointment, every test. Every moment when someone had access to her ears during those crucial early months when the original filament was implanted. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, Elena's first nanny, had kept detailed logs of every doctor's visit, every medication, every person who'd interacted with the baby during her first year of life. Vincent had never paid attention to these records before, dismissing them as unnecessary documentation. But Maria's notes revealed something disturbing. During Elena's 6-month checkup, the pediatrician had spent an unusually long time examining her ears. The appointment that should have taken 15 minutes lasted over an hour, and the doctor had insisted that Vincent and Maria wait outside during the examination, claiming Elena would be calmer without distractions. Dr. Patricia Vance had been Elena's pediatrician for only 6 months before transferring to another practice. She'd come highly recommended, with credentials from prestigious medical schools and references that checked out perfectly. Too perfectly, Vincent now realized. Vincent's security team tracked down Dr. Vance's current location within 6 hours. She was working at a private clinic in Miami, treating children from wealthy families. The same pattern she'd followed in Chicago, access to powerful people through their most vulnerable family members. But when Vincent's men arrived at the Miami clinic, they discovered Dr. Vance had disappeared 2 days earlier. Her apartment was cleaned out, her bank accounts emptied, her identity apparently as fabricated as Dr. Petrov's had been. Vincent was dealing with professionals, people who planned years in advance, who created false identities that could withstand investigation, who understood exactly how to exploit a father's desperation to help his child. The homeless boy was the key to everything. He'd appeared at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right knowledge, to expose a conspiracy that might have continued for years. That wasn't coincidence. That was orchestration. Vincent needed to find the boy before whoever was behind this eliminated the only witness who could identify the real technology that had been used on Elena. The marketplace where Elena had wandered that night was controlled by Vincent's organization. Every vendor, every shop owner, every person who worked in that area owed their livelihood to Vincent's protection. If a homeless child was living there, someone would know about him. Vincent's lieutenant, Marcus Chen, began canvassing the area with a photograph taken from the security cameras. The boy's face was clear enough to identify, but his story was harder to trace. He'd appeared in the marketplace only 3 weeks before the incident with Elena. Before that, no one had seen him. Street kids don't just materialize from nowhere. They have histories, families, origins. They leave trails even when they're trying to stay invisible. But this boy seemed to have emerged from the shadows with no past and no connections to anyone in the area. That's when Vincent realized the boy might not be homeless at all. He might be another part of the elaborate plan that had targeted Elena, someone young enough to approach a child without suspicion, trained enough to recognize surveillance technology, and positioned perfectly to expose the conspiracy at exactly the right moment. But if the boy was working for Vincent's enemies, why had he helped Elena? Why reveal the filament instead of leaving the surveillance system in place? The answer came from Elena herself, during one of her nightly transmissions that Vincent was now monitoring through his own recording equipment. Elena's monotone voice recited a conversation from earlier that day, but embedded within the transmission was something else. A second voice, barely audible, speaking directly to whoever was receiving the signal. "The boy was not part of our operation," the voice said. He compromised years of work. Find him before Torino does. Eliminate the variable. Vincent's blood went cold. The homeless boy wasn't working for his enemies. He was a genuine threat to their operation, a random element that had accidentally exposed their carefully crafted plan, and now they wanted him dead. Vincent had 48 hours to find the boy before professional killers silenced the only person who might be able to help Elena. The race was on, and Vincent Torino was about to discover that protecting his daughter meant going to war with people who'd been planning his destruction since the day she was born. The search for the boy consumed every resource Vincent had. His network of informants, his surveillance teams, his street-level operators, all of them received the same message. Find the homeless kid who saved Elena. Find him before they do. But the boy had vanished like smoke in the wind. The marketplace vendors swore they'd never seen him before that night. The other street children claimed ignorance. Even the security cameras that covered every inch of Vincent's territory showed nothing useful. The boy appeared in frame for exactly 7 minutes, helped Elena, then disappeared into shadows that seemed to swallow him completely. Marcus Chen brought Vincent troubling news on the 3rd day of searching. "Boss, we found something. The boy's fingerprints were in the system." Vincent looked up from the surveillance monitors he'd been staring at for hours. "Juvenile record? Worse. Military database. Special operations training records. This kid has been through programs that don't officially exist." The implications hit Vincent like a physical blow. This wasn't some street orphan who'd accidentally stumbled onto Elena's situation. This was a trained operative. But working for who? And why help Elena if his mission was surveillance? "There's more," Marcus continued. "The fingerprints match a boy who was reported dead 3 years ago. Danny Morrison, age 7, killed in a car accident along with his parents. Except apparently he wasn't." Vincent studied the file Marcus handed him. Danny Morrison's parents had been military contractors, the kind who worked on classified projects and signed agreements that kept them silent forever. The kind who sometimes knew too much about operations they weren't supposed to understand. "Someone faked this kid's death," Vincent said slowly. "Took him young, trained him, turned him into what exactly?" "A ghost," Marcus replied. "Someone who could move through any environment without raising suspicion. Who could access situations that adults couldn't. Who could extract information or plant devices without anyone noticing because nobody suspects a homeless child." But that explanation didn't match what Vincent had witnessed. If Danny was trained to plant surveillance equipment, why had he removed it from Elena's ear? Why expose the very operation he was supposed to be running? The answer came at 3:17 in the morning, when Elena's nightly transmission included something that made Vincent's hands shake. Elena's monotone voice was reciting details from a phone call Vincent had made that afternoon. Business as usual. But then the second voice appeared again. The handler speaking to whoever was receiving the signals. "The Morrison boy has gone rogue," the voice said. "His conditioning broke down. He's operating on emotional attachment now instead of programming. Consider him compromised and expendable." Vincent realized with crystal clarity what had happened. Danny Morrison had been a child soldier, programmed to carry out surveillance operations without understanding what he was doing. But something about Elena had triggered a human response that overrode his conditioning. He'd helped her not because he was following orders, but because he'd chosen to. And now his own handlers wanted him dead. Vincent made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of just finding Danny to extract information, he was going to save him. Because any enemy of the people who'd tortured his daughter was an ally Vincent could work with. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Elena herself. Vincent had been monitoring her transmissions for weeks, learning the schedule and patterns of whoever was controlling her implant. But Elena was smarter than anyone had given her credit for. 7 years old, and she'd figured out something was wrong. She couldn't hear the voices speaking through her device, but she could sense when the transmissions were happening. She could feel the subtle electrical pulses in her head during the nightly sessions, and she'd started paying attention to what triggered them. Elena began leaving coded messages for her father. Nothing obvious enough to alert her handlers, but clear enough for Vincent to understand. She would draw pictures during art time that showed specific locations around the city. She would arrange her toys in patterns that matched street layouts. She would ask innocent questions about places she'd never been, but had somehow learned about through the conversations her device was recording. The final clue came when Elena drew a picture of a boy with sad eyes, standing next to a building with broken windows and a red door. At the bottom of the picture, she wrote 3 letters in crayon, DNY. Vincent knew that building, an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district, officially condemned but still used by various criminal organizations for meetings that required absolute privacy. The red door was a landmark everyone in his world recognized. Vincent assembled his best team. Not just muscle, but specialists. People who could move silently, who could handle sophisticated surveillance equipment, who could extract a trained child operative without harming him. Because Vincent suspected Danny Morrison wasn't hiding in that warehouse by choice. They approached the building at dawn, when the shadows were longest and the streets were empty. Vincent's thermal imaging equipment showed 3 heat signatures inside. One small, approximately child-sized, in what appeared to be a basement room. 2 larger signatures on the ground floor, positioned like sentries. Vincent had expected guards. What he hadn't expected was the level of their equipment. These weren't street thugs with handguns. They had military-grade weapons, communication gear, and surveillance technology that rivaled what Vincent's own organization used. Whoever was behind this operation had resources that went far beyond typical criminal enterprises. Marcus coordinated the entry, while Vincent monitored from a command vehicle parked 2 blocks away. The plan was surgical: neutralize the guards, extract Danny, and disappear before anyone realized what had happened. But plans rarely survive first contact with reality. The guards weren't just protecting Danny. They were preparing to execute him. Vincent's team intercepted radio communications indicating the boy would be eliminated within the hour. The warehouse wasn't a hiding place. It was an execution site. Vincent abandoned the careful approach and gave orders for immediate assault. His team moved through the building like shadows, but the guards were professionals who'd been expecting trouble. Gunfire erupted through the warehouse, echoing off concrete walls and broken windows. Vincent couldn't wait for the all-clear signal. He entered the building himself, moving toward the basement where Danny was being held. What he found there changed everything he thought he understood about the conspiracy against his family. Danny Morrison was strapped to a metal chair, unconscious, with wires attached to his head and arms. Medical equipment surrounded him, monitoring his vital signs and brain activity. This wasn't an execution site. It was a laboratory. Danny had been the test subject for the same technology that was controlling Elena. The difference was that Danny's implants were designed to control his behavior, not just record his experiences. The boy had been turned into a remote-controlled operative, programmed to carry out missions without conscious awareness of what he was doing. But the programming had malfunctioned. Danny's human emotions had overridden the artificial commands, and when he'd seen Elena suffering, he'd acted to help her instead of following his orders. The people who'd created him considered this a critical system failure that needed to be corrected through more invasive procedures. Vincent studied the medical charts scattered around the room. Danny had been subjected to experimental brain surgery multiple times over the past 3 years. Each procedure was designed to suppress more of his natural personality and replace it with artificial programming. The latest notes indicated plans for a final surgery that would eliminate Danny's remaining human consciousness entirely. Vincent carefully disconnected the monitoring equipment and freed Danny from the restraints. The boy was alive but barely conscious, his eyes unfocused and his breathing shallow. Whatever they'd been doing to him had pushed his young body to its limits. As Vincent carried Danny toward the exit, the boy stirred and whispered something that made Vincent's blood freeze. "Elena's not the only one," Danny mumbled. "They have other kids. Lots of them. All over the city." Vincent realized he wasn't just dealing with a conspiracy against his family. He was uncovering a network that was using children as biological surveillance and control devices. Elena and Danny were just two victims in a much larger operation. But who was running this network? And why target the children of powerful people across Chicago? The answer was waiting for Vincent back at his mansion, in the form of a visitor he'd never expected to see again. Dr. Patricia Vance was sitting in Vincent's study when he arrived, flanked by two men in expensive suits, who clearly weren't medical professionals. She looked exactly as she had 7 years earlier, when she'd first implanted the filament in baby Elena's ear. "Hello, Vincent," she said calmly. "I believe you have something that belongs to us." Vincent kept Danny hidden in a safe house while he returned to confront Dr. Vance. She sat in his study like she owned the place, completely relaxed despite being surrounded by armed guards who would kill her on Vincent's word. "You have exactly 60 seconds to explain what you've done to my daughter," Vincent said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that had made him legendary. Dr. Vance smiled. "Your daughter is part of something much bigger than your little criminal enterprise, Vincent. She's a node in a network that monitors the most powerful families in America. Politicians, business leaders, organized crime figures. All of them have children who've been enhanced with our technology." "Enhanced?" Vincent's voice dropped to a whisper. "You call torturing children an enhancement? We call it evolution. Traditional surveillance methods are becoming obsolete, but children have access to information that adults never see. They're present during private conversations, family meetings, intimate moments when people's guards are down. Our implants allow us to monitor these environments without detection." Vincent realized the scope of what he was facing. This wasn't just about his family or even his organization. Someone was using children to spy on the most powerful people in the country, gathering intelligence that could topple governments or destroy economies. "Who's running this?" Vincent demanded. Dr. Vance's smile widened. "People who understand that information is the ultimate weapon. People who've been planning the restructuring of American power for decades. Your daughter and the Morrison boy are just small pieces in a much larger game." But Vincent noticed something in her eyes when she mentioned Danny, a flicker of uncertainty. The boy's escape had disrupted more than just one surveillance operation. It had compromised something bigger. "You're scared," Vincent realized. "Danny knows something that threatens your entire network." Dr. Vance's composure cracked slightly. The Morrison boy was programmed with security protocols that should have prevented exactly what happened. His malfunction represents a critical vulnerability in our technology. If other subjects begin experiencing similar emotional overrides, the entire project could be compromised. Vincent understood now. Danny's act of kindness toward Elena wasn't just one child helping another. It was proof that human emotion could overcome even the most sophisticated mind control technology. And if that was true, then every child in their network was a potential weakness waiting to be triggered. But Dr. Vance had made a crucial mistake by coming to Vincent's mansion. She'd assumed he would negotiate, that he would accept some kind of deal to protect Elena and get back to business as usual. She'd forgotten that Vincent Torino had built his empire by destroying anyone who threatened his family. The negotiation lasted exactly 90 seconds before Vincent gave the signal that would change everything. Vincent's war against the surveillance network lasted 18 months. One by one, he dismantled every operation, freed every child, and eliminated every operative who'd participated in turning innocent kids into biological weapons. Danny Morrison became Elena's protective older brother, his training repurposed to guard instead of spy. Elena's hearing returned completely once the neural implant was safely removed by surgeons Vincent trusted with his life. The mansion that had lived in silence for 7 years now echoes with laughter, music, and the sound of two children who survived hell and found family in each other. Dr. Vance and her network discovered too late that some people can't be controlled, can't be manipulated, and definitely can't be forgiven when they target the innocent. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against sophisticated evil is simple human love. Elena heard that lesson first. Danny learned it next. And Vincent proved it with bullets and blood until every last threat was eliminated. If this story reminded you that miracles come in the smallest packages, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that even in the darkest situations, hope can walk up on bare feet and change everything in 30 seconds.